Should I click that?
So welcome everybody to our April webinar for the Free PGEC, where we have Chipman today. Before we start, I just want to say a quick word about the Free Principle Global Community, which is a not-for-profit organization, and the mission is basically to spread the word about the free principle worldwide. And one of the things we use for that is the webinar, but there's also podcasts, videos, and a lot of things on the website for you to have a look at. And we're really, really pleased to have Chip today. It's a big honor to have him today. And I'm going to give just a very short introduction about Chip, but I'm sure he will tell you a lot more during this talk. So, Chip met Sydney Banks in 1975, and that basically changed his life forever. And he had the immense opportunity to work alongside Sid in various settings, working with different people from corporate executives, inmates, carer, helpers, and basically just people that wanted to have more peace and happiness in their life. And he'll also run his own consulting company, the Vantage Consulting Group, with his wife Jan, and they work with businesses, not-for-profit organizations, and also couple and individuals. And obviously they use the free principle for that. The main thing about Chip is that in 2008, Sid asked him to open the Free Principle School with Healthy Hospital on Salt Spring Island. And as far as I understand it, the school has run 2 sessions a year. But I will leave Chip to talk more about that if he wants to at a later time. So now I'll pass it on to Chip. To you, Chip.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you very much. And I just need to ask a quick question. Do I click on View All Attendees here?
If you want to see all attendees, you can. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that doesn't show me their picture, though. I see.
No, you can't see the picture. No, they can just hear you.
They can just hear you.
Okay, no problem. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Corinne, for that nice introduction. And I wanted to just express my gratitude to the Free Principles Global Community for the honor. It's my honor to be able to speak to you all today. It's been an amazing journey since we first met Sid Banks. And of course, everybody on this call understands that the slightest encounter with Sid Banks meant that things would change in your life if you were listening, if you were open and wanted to hear something. And you know, over the years, at times, sometimes people think, well, you talk about Sid too much, it's really the principles and so on and so forth. But let me just say this. The principles are what Sid brought to the world. He uncovered them. They were always there. The principles are not something that weren't always there because they create the very reality that we see. But it's such an amazing thing that this very ordinary working man, living in this small community in British Columbia, had this amazing experience, had this enlightenment experience where he came to have really the wisdom of the ages just pour into him. And that's worth looking at. And it's not to put the man on the pedestal, it's to look at the event, to see what really happened here that, I guess you could say the wisdom of the ages just came to this person out of nowhere. And that's a very mystical thing to me, and a very powerful thing that this person could change so much. In fact, if you look at all the changes that we've seen in the last almost 40 years, that was the first example of profound change, of transformational change. Because Sid became a totally different person after his experience, so much so that people who knew him actually physically at times didn't recognize him. His change was so profound and so deep. And it's just fascinating to me that we go along through history and every once in a while there's a crack in the universe and this deep truth of who and what we really are, our true essence, is revealed to somebody. Nobody knows why. And you know, why a simple working guy, a blue-collar man working in a mill in British Columbia, at times I really wondered about that, but then I think, how appropriate. You know, if it would have been some famous philosopher, we would have debated philosophies. If it had been, you know, somebody who had read and learned, we'd wonder what he'd adapted from, and it would look derivative. But out of nowhere, this guy who had never looked at consciousness raising, never thought about it even, all of a sudden has this profound insight and experiences this unbelievable transformational change. And then turns around and looks at all of us and says, all of you can do this too. Now, I didn't necessarily mean that any of us would have the kind of experience that he had, so deep, so profound, so all-encompassing. But he knew that we could move beyond the filter of our thinking. He knew that we could see beyond the world that we've been perceiving through our lives. He knew that we could experience even a small taste of moving beyond what we thought we were looking at, who we thought we were, who we thought we were, and how we would move forward in our lives, that we could move beyond all of that. And so the amazing thing about this mystical experience that this working man had is that at least bit by bit it's transferable. And everybody in the Three Principles global community and really everywhere that I've ever listened to Sid, we've had that experience of touching something that's beyond what we think, beyond what we believe we know. And so the title of today's talk was going to be Going Inside and Living in the Now, and that's what we're describing right now. That's what I'm describing, is the wisdom that's available in the principles resides within us, resides in the depths of our very soul, our very essence. And that's what going inside really means. It means going deeper than what we think. It's that beautiful, beautiful moment when for just 1 second, just the slightest second, the world that we've known stops. And the second that world stops, we're sitting in the middle of insight. We're sitting in our true selves. We're in that place within where all wisdom resides, all health resides, always been there. It's always been there. But in that second, when our world stops for just a moment, just a flash of a second, we experience that. And when we experience that, what's really happening is in that moment we are truly in the now. We're in that precious moment when nothing from the past exists. Nothing from the distant past, nothing throughout our lives, nothing from 20 minutes ago, nothing from 20 seconds ago. We're here in this moment. And in this moment, all things are perfect. We are our true selves in that moment when we're truly in the now. And that was Sid's message throughout his life, was that everybody he spoke to, he wanted them to understand that nobody in the entire world had more wisdom than they did. We all have that profound wisdom within us. And that, in essence, is the true message of the Three Principles, that no matter what you've been through in this life, no matter what you've experienced, when you arrive at that moment when the world stops just for a second, you have everything you need to experience a loving, peaceful, happy life. In that moment, you are your true self, who you really are, regardless of what you've been through. It's really hard sometimes to describe what going inside really means. I mean, I didn't understand it really. I still don't in full. And in the beginning, I certainly didn't understand it. You know, was it inside my body? Was it inside my heart? Was it inside my head? But really, what it is inside the world that we perceive, beyond the world that we perceive. We go beyond our personal selves. And that sounds like something that's very difficult to do. And it is until we just experience it. And how do you get there? How do you get to that wonderful world inside where you can't make yourself go there? You can't do any technique or method to go there. You can't wish you were there, but you can listen. And by listen, I don't mean like listen to me or even really listen to Sid. But you listen to wherever you think wisdom is. And you listen with all of your heart. And you listen from inside. See? Not from your head, from your heart. And when you just truly listen, just think about it. Listening is the ultimate form of meditation. Because when you listen, truly listen from your heart, you won't be thinking. You won't be grinding through all the things that you've been through and all the things you worry about and all the things you're concerned about and all of your relationship stuff. You won't be doing any of that. You will be, listening is the pathway to the moment, to the now. And that's all we really have to do with this knowledge is listen. You listen to what Sid has to say. You listen when you listen to other people. You listen deeply when you read. You listen to the person who's checking your groceries out, at the grocery store. You listen to your children and their beautiful innocence. And you begin to see that when you listen at a really deep level, your mind gets quiet. You experience that peace. And the amazing thing about that peace and about that quiet and about that moment when the world just stops is all that thinking that you had before that happens is automatically reordered. There's really nothing to do. There's nothing to fix. We've had a gentleman, work with us in the last little while, and when we talked about why he wanted to come to Salt Spring and work with us, he basically said he just needed peace of mind, that things were difficult for him at this time, and he was concerned and worried, and how is this going to work out, and will this relationship ever get straightened up, and on and on and on. And, Jan and I did our best to listen with compassion, and we did. We've been there. We felt compassion for that suffering that Sid, throughout his life, was committed to relieving. Right? And so we really, really listened. And it was really beautiful because in watching this person, even when they were talking about the difficulties that they were going through, about the concerns and their inability to keep a peaceful state of mind, what I saw was an amazing level of courage. Somebody really looking for who and what they are on the inside. And so when they would finish telling us about the troubles and the insecurities and the relationship issues in their life, we would just, have compassion and talk about how everybody goes through that. But then we would switch gears because we've learned, working with Sid and working with people through the years, that there really aren't answers in what we've been through in life. Everybody goes through stuff. Everybody gets lost. Everybody who's been around the principles eventually comes into some period where they feel they've lost it, right? And when we switch gears, what we want to talk about is what's upstream. What exists before all of that experience. And really what we're talking about then is who and what you are before your thinking, before your problems, before your personal history. Who and what you really are on the inside. And I would just say that with this guy, that talk went that way, and he would get this little bit of a feeling, and then he would slip back into talking about what was going on in his thinking and going on in his life and how to sort it out and how do I stop. And again, we would listen, and then we would start talking about who and what we are on the inside. how beautiful a person he really is on the inside. And we talk about this mystical world that exists inside of us, and how thought is the bridge to both worlds. Sid referred to it as a mystical bridge to both worlds. Thought is a bridge that takes us into the world of our thinking and our belief system about what this world is. And when you get on the crest of that bridge, that mystical bridge of thought, it's also the vehicle that allows us to look at the true spiritual nature of our lives. And that if we look inside at the true spiritual nature of life, the true spiritual nature of the principles, our thinking just gets, at least temporarily, wiped out. And we have this beautiful experience. So we were sitting in this beautiful, sunny spot, Jan and this person and I talking, and once more we were talking about what upstream was, about what the three principles really were, their spiritual nature. And I looked over at this person, and as I was looking into his eyes, I saw that change, that beautiful moment when he was with us in that quiet world, when he experienced, just for a moment, that peaceful world where none of the stuff he was talking about even existed. You know? And we just sat there quietly. And then when he started to speak, it was almost as if it was a new language. Because he was feeling the essence of who and what he really was. And what's really beautiful about that is, like, I want to make sure that we're not creating a misunderstanding. We all have experience in life. We all go through things. We all get insecure, right? We all have had things in our lives that are hard to handle. We've been caught up in relationships that are not healthy sometimes, you know. What was really beautiful. Oops, I just lost everything on the, there we go. Sorry, my picture went away. What was really beautiful about that moment, and when this person started speaking again, is when we have that experience of having that quiet mind, of really experiencing the principle that's coming from within us, then, as healthy people, we can look back on all of our life and see all of it, good and bad, with a profound level of understanding. We can see the psychological innocence of everybody we've thought has hurt us in our lives. We can see that they are lost in their world, just like we get lost in ours. And in that seeing of our life from that beautiful, healthy place is the most profound freedom I think exists in this world. Okay? Freedom from the tyranny of our own thinking. Freedom from the tyranny of our own past. To realize that we have perfect health within us right now. Right now. And when Sid talked about perfect health being one thought away, that's exactly what he meant. That in that moment of peace and silence, there is nothing to fix. There is nothing to cure. There's nothing that we need help for. Insecurity does not exist in that world. I remember the first time I heard Sid Banks say that insecurity was an illusion created by thought. That changed my life forever, because until that moment I lived in a world of insecurity. Now, it was expressed in anger and aggression and resentment and, you know, all those things, but it was still insecurity. And I knew, somewhere inside of myself, I knew that to be a fact. But when I heard Sid Banks say, insecurity is just an illusion created by thought, intellectually I didn't grasp how that could be. And yet, I felt this hope, this sense that maybe the world I lived in, the world that I had suffered in most of my life, depression, anger, upset, resentment of people that I felt had hurt me, that was a dream. I had that first sense that that was a dream. And that maybe really there is no such thing as insecurity. Now, I didn't experience that right away. I didn't like, oh wow, now I don't feel any insecurity. But there was this grain of hope, this little niggling little grain of hope. And when I would experience insecurity going forward, that was always there talking to me. As it has been with all of us, with all of you. You know? And over time, I would have these little experiences where I'd really see it. You know, I'd really see that that insecurity was just thought. So when I say that the principles bring you to the most profound freedom possible, there is no more profound freedom than freedom from the tyranny of our own thinking. Right? Now, I understand that we have to be respectful and compassionate about what people have been through. I mean, part of our work through the years has been talking to people who have been severely abused, severely injured in their lives. When we worked in the prisons, we worked in a women's prison for a long time, Jan and I. We spent, 4 hours a week, two nights a week for 2 hours each for 3 years, going into a maximum security women's prison. And in the prison system, the statistic they used was that something like 60% of the women in that system had been physically or sexually abused in some way or another. And that was part of their history, part of their pathology, right? So-called pathology. So when we talked to them, we had to be respectful of the fact that they'd been through that, right? I know, because that's the kind of life that I went through as a boy, as a young man. I experienced violence and all of those things. So I know that when that was happening, that was real. And I know that when you experience those kinds of things, it affects your thinking, it affects your level of security, it affects how you see the world, it creates your personality to a great extent. However, in listening to that and listening to the women in that prison, the one thing that just kept ringing through from listening to Sid is that while that is true in part of our lives, we live at the end of our thinking until we realize what thought is. And the wonderful thing about working in that environment is we could see these people who were so downtrodden, hanging their heads down, feeling terrible about themselves and their lives. And after we introduced Sid's books and videos, we would show them videos and we would talk about our experience and talk about the principles and learn to really talk from inside, like right now, without thinking, right? You'd start to see that moment, like I described with that person, when this peaceful look would wash over them, right? And what was really amazing about that is, the only way I can describe it is they had a shift in their identity. They had a profound shift in their identity. Prior to learning about who and what they were on the inside, and about these mystical spiritual principles that create life, they thought they were that experience that they had. They had shame, they had guilt, they had fear, you could tell they just had no hope in their lives, right? And so they look at Sid's DVDs, they read his books, and you see that moment. And it's the only way I can describe it. You see that moment when their identity actually shifts. And suddenly, they're carrying themselves different. They don't even really understand. They didn't even really understand what had happened, but they're carrying themselves differently. There's a process when they would come into class in the prison where the corrections officer is checking them in and making sure that they're the person they're supposed to be and so on. And we would already be in the room, so we would be watching them come in. And in the early classes, there was that downtrodden look, that kind of life is terrible look. And a few weeks later, you look at these people coming in and you see they are different people. They're carrying themselves differently. You can see that sweet innocence in their faces, and you can see that they're happy, they're enjoying life. And as they sat down in front of us, you could see that their identity had shifted from I am this person who's been through all of this, so on and so forth, to I have this beautiful truth inside of me. I have this good person inside of me. Because the true self, who and what we are on the inside, I mean, this is the fact that informs psychology so powerfully from the three principles. This is the real fact, is that that true self within, who and what we really are, can never be damaged. It can never be damaged because it's not of this world. It's spiritual in essence. What gets damaged is just between the ears. And that's what we would see, what Jan and I would see when these people would sit down with this beautiful look on their face, is they were looking at us from that place. And there was an understanding that we were in that place together. And now we know many of these people years later, some of whom served many years in prison, who are living beautiful lives, who walked away from all of that and just left it behind. Just began brand new lives. So he used to tell us that you're not trying to fix people's problems. You're trying to show them a whole new world. An entirely new world. And that's what those women experienced when they read his books, listened to his DVDs. They didn't incrementally change their behavior. They weren't even addressing their behavior. They weren't even addressing their thinking. They went to a place where they experienced a shift and they saw a whole new world. One of the women who now works for a not-for-profit that we established to carry on our work in Florida before we moved back to British Columbia tells the story of how she didn't know what we were talking about. She thought we were the strangest people that had ever come in there. But she listened and she saw a couple of DVDs and was reading, I think, Second Chance. She said she went to bed one night and she was just about asleep on her bunk in her cell, and she just sat bolt upright, and she just saw how thought had created the world that she was in. And what's really neat is she saw it in this way. She realized that what was done. What she saw about thought was, okay, all that stuff really happened to me. I experienced all that thing as a child and everything. What she saw was what she was doing with thought on a moment-to-moment basis. She saw what she was doing with thought now, bringing the past forward through this powerful thing we call thought, so that it distorted the present and continued the patterns and continued to create the negative life she was in. She saw that deep within her soul and immediately began to weep, is her story, because she knew she was free. No matter what happened going forward, she knew that her health existed deep within. And now that person is just, she's an amazing person. She's taught all over the world, you know. She's taught in London and all over the United States. It's just really amazing. And it's so amazing what happens to people when they have that 1 second, that just quiet moment when the world they've known just stops. You can't predict how powerful the events in their lives will be when they have that moment. I used to think that Sid was clairvoyant because he would talk about what was going to happen in the future, right? This is way back in the day when we were first learning. He would say outrageous things. Things I thought were outrageous at the time. Like I can remember one time we'd watched some silly British TV show, comedy at his house, and we were having a really good laugh. And Barb, his wife, his first wife who passed away, was serving us tea, and we're just really in a nice mood. We had a really good chuckle, and things got quiet. And we'd only been around maybe 2 or 3 months at the time, but our lives had changed completely. When we met Sid, our marriage was disintegrating, and in the next 2 months, we had the happiest 2 months of our lives, and just were really, I couldn't even explain it. I've been a searcher for, God, most of my life, through all kinds of ways, and here we were changing, and I couldn't understand what was changing us, because we weren't meditating anymore, we weren't doing this, we weren't following this technique, but here we were, just really happy, right? So we're sitting having our cup of tea after watching this TV show, and things get quiet, and Sid looks at us and he says, you know, someday you're going to travel all over the world and talk to people in all stations of life about what's happened to you and about these profound principles, and it's going to help a lot of people. Someday you're going to travel all over the world. Now here we were living on our little island here on Salt Spring, doing our little jobs and just getting by. And this guy is saying, this man is saying, you're going to change the world, right? And so we said our good nights and gave Sid and Barb a big hug. They were the most beautiful, lovely, warm people. And we walked out into the driveway, into the moonlight, Jan and I looked at Jan and I said, you know, he's a really nice person, but he's really delusional. You know, and I'll never forget this. It was one of the first times I was flying over to Europe to do a talk, right? And we were on the plane. We were actually going to do a conference with Sid, and we were on the plane, and it was at night, and it was one of those beautiful nights when we were above the clouds, but there was full moon. So I'm looking out the window of the plane, and there's this gorgeous moon out there, and the clouds below us are just glowing silver, and it was just very mystical looking night. And I was just absorbed in that, looking at that beautiful sight out the window of the plane. And the hair on the back of my neck just stood up because I went back to that moment when Sid said that to us, and that was like years before. And I just got it. Wow, you know. And so later on, when we were working in the prison, when we were working with these women, we had this particularly beautiful night. And the feelings in the room were fantastic, and the women had been sharing at such an amazing level what they were discovering and how they were sharing it with their families outside of the prison, and their cousin had gotten better, and somebody had talked about their mom. They got their mom to get second chance in quest of the parole, and mom had been depressed all her life, and now is experiencing all this health and happiness. So it was just one of those marvelous nights in the prison where all these feelings were being expressed. And I was really, really full, you know. And out of me, just out of nowhere, I said, you know, someday, some of you women in this room are going to travel all over the world and talk about what happened in this prison. Talk about what happened inside of you. And they looked at me like I was crazy, right? Well, it wasn't but a year and a half, 2 years later, something like that, when one of those women phoned us. And she was on her way to London to talk to a conference of therapists and doctors and ordinary people and business people. This person, this so-called lowly person that we found in this prison cell, was on her way to London to do that. And that's when I really knew it's not clairvoyance. It's just that when you're privileged and honored to touch your true self, to have that 1 second when the world you think exists disappears and you see a new world, there's no predicting what you'll do, because you know the only real authority in sharing these principles is your personal experience, your own insight. You know, you can talk about it intellectually, you can try and explain it, but the people that I see out there that are really affecting the world are talking about an experience that they've had. You know, that beautiful moment. They're talking about that. And when people hear people talking about that beautiful moment, about the fact that life can change in a blink of an eye, and that authority, that authenticity is probably a better word. is there, like with this woman I'm talking about when she talks. The authenticity is amazing because she's talking about the experience of insight, the experience of her world stopping, the experience of seeing a new world. And so it's totally predictable in a sense. It's not clairvoyance. And all of you, so many people on this call and throughout the world have had that beautiful experience. And sometimes we think our little experience is small, but it's not. The slightest experience of seeing a new world, of experiencing who and what we are on the inside, is profoundly powerful. And you have a message if that happens. There's always two worlds that exist simultaneously. There's the world of our thinking, and there's the true world. The world of spiritual essence, who and what we really are. And that beautiful world is always there, just over our shoulder. You know, it's always only one thought away. And nobody has more access to it than anybody else. It's always there. You know. So you can see how these three principles, these divine principles, inform psychology. Because the first thing you need to understand in any science is, how does the system really work? Well, here's the thing. What the three principles tell the field of psychology, and what Sid worked to share throughout his whole life, is that all of us, every single person, regardless of their current condition, experience, insecurity, whatever, all of us are spiritual beings at our core. You know, we've got this computer full of data, but what's looking at the data? Who's looking at it? Okay? Our true selves, who and what we really are. And if you think that that's what human beings really are, if you see that innate health is our birthright, it's what we are, then it changes. It has to change everything that we think about psychology. And it takes us away. It informs psychology to move away from studying pathology, studying what's wrong, studying behavior, to helping people understand what health is and where it comes from. Like mind, when we talk about mind, I can't really explain what mind is, but I know, I feel some things about it. I feel, for one thing, that it's pure. It's pure love. It's pure essence. It's that thing that's looking at all that information. It's the seed of our true self, right? And it's perfectly healthy. Perfectly healthy. It can't be anything else. So when psychology begins to understand that, it changes what we focus on. It changes the focus from studying the ways in which we're broken, which, you know, gets redescribed and redescribed and relabeled and relabeled to there's so many million ways to be broken now. And yet there really is only one way to be broken, and that's just the misuse of these amazing principles. Just the misuse of these beautiful principles. The not understanding what thought is, really. You know? Now, I know that experience creates all that insecure thought and everything. That's definitely part of it. But when we're trying to help people move to a new world, experience something new, then these three principles inform us so much about the true nature of what human beings are, that it changes what we think we need to do to help them. I remember reading a book, a scary book, called The Alienist. And it was about, I think it was like a turn-of-the-century period novel, you know. But the term alienist was a term that was used for the first people that were trying to help people with their psychological problems. These people were called alienists. And what it meant was they were trying to help people who were alienated from their true nature. Isn't that neat? I really like that. They were trying to help people who were simply alienated from their true nature. I think they were closer to it in those days. Because really that's what our challenge is. That's what we've been given, the gift we've been given through these principles in SID, is just to see that our only job is to help people have a sense of their true nature. Because they'll sort it out themselves. The second they have that beautiful feeling, the second they have a momentary experience of who and what they are on the inside, they'll reorder their thinking. I mean, we've watched that for 30-some years. We've watched people do that over and over and over again. And when we describe that moment of insight, it's always very similar. It's a moment when their thinking has stopped. A slight moment when that world they lived in goes to sleep. And the true world awakens, the true self awakens. I remember many years ago, I'd only heard Sid speak 2 or 3 times, and we got invited to a bonfire on the beach here in Salzburg. And it was a really dark night, and we went to this blazing bonfire, and we're all sitting around. And Sid began to talk about our true selves and our innocence, who and what we were on the inside. And he made this statement about something, I mean, I'm paraphrasing because I don't really remember, but it was something to the effect of, who and what we are on the inside is so beautiful that if we ever glimpsed it, we would be free for life. We would see how to live the most beautiful life possible. We would use that beautiful power of thought as a rudder to move our way through the most beautiful life we could imagine. And I was enthralled with this as I was sitting around this bonfire. And we just had this really beautiful period of real happiness, and something just grabbed me when he was talking, and I was overcome with the feeling of gratitude that I had been given the opportunity to be free from all of that. And I started to become very emotional as I sat there. And back in those days, I didn't want anybody to see me being emotional, the people that were around the fire, so I stood up and I walked down the beach in the dark, and I found a log to sit on. And Jan followed me down. We were both sitting on this log, and it was super dark out. There was no moon. It was a starlit night, but there was no moon. And there was phosphorus in the water, like these little lights in the water. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's very beautiful. And we were just looking at that and just feeling that beautiful feeling inside. And very quietly, Sid walked up behind us and joined us. And we were just sitting there watching this little show in the water. And I was just feeling, how could this be, you know? How could it be so simple, you know, to have suffered from all of this stuff all my life, and now it's over, you know? I see what it is. So we were sitting there, and then Sid says, out of the blue, and I remember we'd only been around to a few talks, right? He says, so you want to share this with the world? And I went, huh? What? And I looked at him, and it just came out of me. I said yes, and Jan said yes. And Sid goes like this. He just this beautiful, quiet voice with his lovely Scottish accent. He goes, take my hand, and we'll walk across this world, and we'll find people in various stages of sleep. We'll touch them on the shoulder with love, and we'll watch them wake up. And he paused for a moment, and he goes, there's no life like it. There is no other life like it. It's the most beautiful life you can imagine. And what I can tell you is this, all these years later, that was an understatement. Living in a world of understanding, reaching out when you can to help somebody else see a new world. Man, there is no other life like it. There is nothing like it. I couldn't wish for another thing in my life, honestly, than to just have the privilege of sharing these principles as best I can from my understanding with a world in need, sometimes a world in terrible need. And that's why I'm really grateful to the Three Principles global community and everybody out there that's so dedicated to sharing this with the world. It's going to change the world. You know, sometimes we think, well, it's taking so long and people aren't looking, but Sid knew. Sid used to call it the done deal. Let's say it's a done deal. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Once this understanding, once the existence of these three principles is known, it's only a matter of time, because more and more people will have that profound experience and experience that transformational change, and others will begin to notice. You know? And it's a done deal. And our great fortune in this life, all of us, everybody on this call and everybody in this community, our great fortune is that we get to help. We get to contribute, because every time you reach out in any way to show people what they have within them, any time you set out to help somebody experience relief from their suffering, you're giving that gift to yourself. You can't give yourself more than that. It's an amazing thing to share this with anybody. You really can't give yourself a more profound gift than that. You know, the most powerful learning that we experienced in our time with Sid was not words. He wasn't even talking about the principles. He rarely, actually, when we were just hanging out, he rarely talked about the principles. He just lived, you know. He lived this amazing life where he was in that feeling most of the time, and he was always trying to draw us into that feeling. Not with words, just with the way he lived life. I mean, when Sid cut his lawn, he would look at it after and he would just be moved by the beauty of his lawn. Every cup of tea was the best cup of tea he ever had, you know. And when he was infectious, he would just grab you and you would begin to just have this wonderful, wonderful gratitude for the most ordinary things in life. You'd get down on the floor and play with your kids and you'd think, how lucky am I, right? You go for a walk with your wife or your husband and just see the world like you've never seen it before. And that was just the way he was. He just kept inviting people into that amazing, amazing world. You know? And he knew that just experiencing that feeling, there was no greater learning than that. And so really, most of the time spent with Sid was just in that beautiful feeling. And every once in a while, things would get quiet. And he would, as we would say, just go really high and talk about the principles and the true nature of the principles, the true nature of us. And that, of course, was beautiful and special. But honestly, just being with him was in his presence. And see, that's true for all of you, too. As you go out and live your lives, it's your presence. It's your living in that beautiful world that impacts people. In fact, that's what has people really want to listen to what you have to say, is they can see that you're living in that beautiful world. I remember early on having this, what I thought was a blinding insight. I just had to go and tell Sid about this insight I had. And I called him and he didn't answer his phone, so I figured he's out working in his garden, which he did a lot, right? So I jump in my car and I drive across Salt Spring, and I can't wait to tell Sid about this insight. I drive down to the driveway and I get down there and sure enough he's cutting his lawn, right? And I can't wait to tell him about this insight. So I go up to him and he's pushing his lawnmower and I tap him on the shoulder and he looks at me and he turns off his lawnmower and I start blah, 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 tell him about this insight that I had. I don't even remember what it was. It was something about thought and thinking. And he goes like this, he goes, oh. And I waited a moment and I said, quieter. I said it quieter, what my profound insight was. He walked in the house, he let his dog, beautiful dog, out, and he walked into the woods by his house. So I walked along with him, and we walked through the woods for about 15 or 20 minutes without saying a word. And we came to this cliff over the ocean, that sat over the ocean, with all the Gulf Islands spread out before us, a beautiful, sunny, sparkly day. And we sat on the edge of that cliff and watched the sailboats and the seagulls, and there was a couple of eagles flying out there. And I just sat there looking out, and I thought, oh man, this is beautiful. But then I looked up at Sid. And tears were running down his face as he looked out at this beautiful scene. And it just moved me. It just grabbed me. And I remember looking back out at that scene, and I felt like I was seeing the earth for the first time ever. And all emotion and the twinkling in the ocean. I don't know how to explain this, but I felt like I could feel it. You know, I could feel it. And we just sat there together for about maybe half an hour. And then he stood up and brushed off his pants, and I did the same thing. And we walked back through the woods and over to his place. And he walked up to his lawnmower and pulled it and started it. And I went away, and I got in my car and drove home. And we never talked about that insight that I had. I forgot about it, as a matter of fact. But I remember that as my favorite time spent with Sid. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what happened. I know that I was a different person after. And he never said a whole word the whole time. He didn't even say hello. So it's not in the words. It really is in the feeling. It's been hard for many of us, me included, to comprehend over the years that there's information in a feeling. But I know that's true. I know that in that moment, sitting by the ocean, I was learning at a rate I couldn't comprehend with my mind. So we're getting near the end. I'm wondering, Corinne, if anybody has any questions they want to put in before we sign off.
Hello everybody, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand by clicking on the hand at the bottom of the list on the tab, or send me a chat and I will unmute you so you can ask your question.
Okay.
So anybody wants to ask a question?
Well, while you're typing, let me remind you that the Three Principles School on Salt Spring will be on May 30th to June 2nd. And the title is Seeing Beyond the Form of Our Thinking. And we're really looking forward to that. And I just want to say just about Sid's vision. His dream was that his books would get out to the world. He knew that if those books got out, because he's still here in those books. That power still resides in those books and those DVDs. And that was his vision, that they would get out to the world to give everybody the opportunity that we've all had. So many times we've given people those books and you just can't believe what comes from it.
If you don't have anybody for questions, I think everybody is very quiet.
Well, that's nice too, isn't it? Well, this has been really nice. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Okay. I think
Thank you all, whoever's on. Thank you so much.
I'm going to wrap up now. I'm going to wrap up now, Chipman, and I want to thank you very much. It was wonderful. And
you're most welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And just want to remind everybody there is another webinar next month if you want to join.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye, and thank you, Corinne, for doing such a good job of hosting. It's been really nice to get to know you.
Okay. Thank you, Chip. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.